Hey there, Stephen Oliver here. I'm at my favorite little coffee shop down in downtown Evergreen, Colorado. It's called Muddy Buck, but it's an old hotel in Evergreen that got converted into a little coffee shop here. I work down here on a couple days a week. But I wanted to talk about, I've had, a wonderful opportunity to talk to some really broke and school owners. And I wanted to talk about the difference between the successful school owners and the ones that are just poor in mind, body, and outcome. And it's really interesting. I remember I had three conversations in the last week of small school owners. Normally, they wouldn't get on my calendar. I asked Bob to start putting a number of these on my calendar to give them some feedback and some growth tips and some ways that they could make some headway. And frankly, if you're open-minded and looking to grow, I'd be tickled to death to talk to you too. You go to martialartswealth.com and or call my office and talk to Bob Dunn, and I'd be happy to chat with you. But these three particular school owners that I'm thinking about, one of them spent I don't know 25 minutes arguing with me about how it's impossible to make a living, how it's impossible to make any revenue running a martial arts school. And it was the funniest conversation. And if he had done any research whatsoever, which I'm sure he didn't, he would have easily come across with a little bit of my background. And my background, not to read back my biography, but I worked my way through Georgetown University, working through the Junior Institute. They were probably financially the most successful business martial arts organization in the country, and one of the most successful martial arts organizations in the country. We had about half of the world ranked kickboxers were all in our stable, and many of them were instructors. We had two of the three world form champions in the open competition, being Charlie Lee and John Chung. So we had incredibly high quality black belts, high quality students. And at the same time, the organization was a multi-million dollar chain of martial arts schools. And I went from that to opening in Denver. I opened five schools in 18 months, six schools in 30 months. By the time I was 25 years old, I was running in today's dollar terms a $5 million plus operation with what became about 3,500 students, and kept growing and developing from there for many, many, many years. Ran one of the top martial arts tournaments in the country, a NASCAR World Tour event. Ended up developing franchise operations, and then ended up moving into what I do today, which is, we still have Mile High Karate schools, but I mostly do coaching and consulting for martial arts schools, and most of them are top 1% or 5% in the industry. Not that they started that way, but we developed them into 80,000, 100,000, 120, 150, 160, $200,000 a month facilities. And that's across Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, MMA, Muay Thai, traditional Tae Kwon Do, traditional karate, more Americanized Taekwondo or kickboxing schools, really across every style and genre, whether it's a predominantly adult focused, predominantly kids focused. And my preference, frankly, is the kids market. But when I grew to 2,500 and 3,500 students when I was early on, they were predominantly adults. And then we shifted into the kids market, and I preferred that better as we went. But I want to give you some thoughts on what it takes to stay broke. And it's frankly easier to stay broke than to become successful. But the thing that keeps you broke is mindset. If there's the old thing is you become like the five closest acquaintances, and that's been proven to be pretty scientifically valid. In the martial arts field, what tends to happen is you end up with friends and associates who are in the same tournament circuit that you are, or in the same association that you are. And it's certainly true that whether you're running an MMA gym or you're running a Taekwondo school, is there are more people who are failing as a martial arts school owner or as a combat gym than there are that are being successful. The top 5%, the top 20%, that means that they're the top one out of five, or they're the top one out of 20, or top 1%, or the top one out of 100. So statistically, even the people that you're likely to associate with if you don't do it selectively are going to be at the bottom end of the spectrum. One of the gentlemen I talked to, he said, "Well, I talked to all my friends who run schools, and they all tell me how hard it is to make a living running a martial arts school." I said, maybe you should talk to the people who are running successful schools and not talking to the people who are running small and or failing schools. Uh, but if you don't believe it's true, if you don't believe it's possible, then it's not possible. If you can't see it, you can't manifest it. I mean, that's as old as time, but certainly you can go back to, success skills from Benjamin Franklin, success skills from Andrew Carnegie and Dale Carnegie, and success skills from, anybody from Zig Ziglar to Tony Robbins to whoever's top people today, Grant Cardone or Patrick Beck David or whoever it might be. And they all say the exact same thing. You've got to see it and visualize it before you can become it. And you've got to believe it before you'll manifest it. So if you want to be broke and stay broke, listen to other broke people, take advice from other broke people, listen to how hard it is. The one gentleman who was trying to convince me, it was just amazing. I'm sure I pissed him off because I said, you just rattled off an awful long list of excuses for why the school is not doing well. And it might be better to get rid of the excuses and to focus on what the strategies and tactics are to be successful. And I'll walk you through that here briefly. But the first thing not to do is talk to other small schools, other broke schools or gym, and then take their word that it's difficult to be successful in this. What you want to do is you want to find the people who are doing what you'd like to accomplish. If you want to be $1 million a year business, talk to $1 million a year school owners, or better yet, talk to the people who showed them how to get there and how to develop it, like myself. But if you look around and you find references, this conversation was that I'm relaying. He talked about, parents will spend $7 at Starbucks on coffee, but then they whine about pricing. And by the way, he's charging, I think, $80 a month or something pathetic like that. Our top schools are in the range of 300 to 400 a month, and then for the higher level program, sometimes $500 to $600 a month. And if you're a small school or a broke school, you'd probably stop listening right there and said, "Oh, that's impossible. Nobody would pay that. They won't pay that in my market. They won't pay, my type of students won't pay that." And it's just crazy. So that's number one is you want to recognize that if you present value in such a way that it's emotionally accepted and intellectually accepted, and the emotional is more important. If you present value, especially for a parent, for a child, but also for an adult, for themselves, people will pay a tuition that's comparable to what they perceive the value to be. And if you're just teaching punching and kicking or choking and so forth, that's not perceived as very valuable. But if you're going to teach them to be a new person, teach them how to be very successful in what they're doing, whether it's an adult or a child, that becomes very valuable. In fact, it becomes priceless. So, the things that broke people do is they become convinced that it's not possible to achieve the numbers. They get convinced that somebody like myself who's telling them it's possible or lying, exaggerating, or just have an ulterior motive. Number three is they look for references. It's called confirmation bias, but they look for references that support their belief system. What I'd rather do is I'd rather look for references that support the possibility, not support the lack of possibility. But that's what they do is they look for references that support their belief system that it's difficult or impossible. I talk about my own progress, and there was a great book by Robert Kiyosaki, I believe, called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I kind of came up under the poor dad side. My martial arts instructors in Tulsa, Oklahoma were convinced you can't make a living. One of them, who ironically owned a family business, said to me when I went to Denver, he said, "You can go play karate for a while, then get a real job." Pretty quickly, by the way, my martial arts school chain was grossing more than his family business and netting uh, far more than his family business, but he was convinced it was impossible. My other instructor was teaching the YMCA and charging, today even like 1/5 or 1/6 of what we're charging for lessons, and convinced that's the most that people will pay. Uh, but my rich dad poor dad story was, the rich dad was June Rhee, Nick Kokinis, Jeff Smith, Ned Muffley, but they were the people running the June Rhee Institute. And the poor dad were the instructors that I was training with in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who were convinced that it was really impossible to make a living, that there was no possibility of making a living. And strangely, they were affiliated with the June Rhee Institute. It's just I said to Jeff Smith many times, why didn't you guys tell us that, what the numbers were and what the possibility was? Because it was strictly a martial arts affiliation. They weren't explaining to us what the possibilities were. But as I moved to Washington, D.C., kind of convinced that this wasn't going to be a career for me. I saw Jeff Smith driving a Mercedes. I saw Junior living in a huge mansion and driving a Cadillac. I saw Nick Okinis driving his Rolls Royce. And I realized that the numbers that they were doing were mind-boggling, both in terms of the number of students, what they were charging, what the revenue is. I wasn't privy to the profit and loss statement, but they were running a very, very, very successful business. And I went from thinking that I was going to get a degree in economics and an MBA and end up on Wall Street to deciding that I was going to run martial arts schools. And that seemed like a more interesting living, and it could probably be as lucrative as what I was looking at doing. But the first part is mindset. If you don't believe it's possible, watch a bunch of videos on this channel. What you're going to see is you're going to see a whole bunch of people talking about how, last month they did $220,000, or they did 160,000, or they did 80,000. And the schools that I work with, when they do 100,000 a month, we want their net to be 50% or more. So $100,000 a month school should be a 40, 50, $60,000 a month net profit. Uh, that's the other problem I see in the industry. It's off my subject here, but people talk about $1 million schools, but then what happens is they're running $1 million school in a warehouse with a whole bunch of staff, and they're bringing 5% to the bottom line. If I had the choice of running a $15,000 a month school and making 5,000 a month, or $100,000 a month school and making 5,000 a month, heck, I'd run a $15,000 a month school. Our guys that are running a $100,000 a month school are netting 50,000 or more after all the expenses. But anyway, back to mindset. If you don't have the references and you don't see it happening, and it's easy not to see it happening because only one out of 20 schools are doing the type of business that we're talking about, and maybe even one out of 100 are doing the super high numbers. You've got to get references, meet people, and understand. Again, rich dad, poor dad. If you hang around with broke people, if you hang around with five broke people, you're going to be the sixth. If you hang around with five successful people, you'll be the sixth, because all of a sudden the mindset and the expectation and the understanding. If you want to know strategy is build a full-time professional career by providing the highest possible service, and that's mental, physical, and emotional, not just teaching techniques. They can pick that up off of YouTube nowadays. Is you want to be providing the highest possible quality of service. You want to be charging at the top end of the market. Again, I mentioned some price points, but you want to be charging at the top end of the market, teaching people who are delighted to pay for the tuition you're charging and getting the value of what that is. Then you want to get good enough at marketing so you can create 100 people who have raised their hand enough to say that they're interested in martial arts lessons or MMA or whatever it is you're doing. And then you want to get a good process together to introduce them to your program, to hold their hand early on, and then to convert them into a paying student. So you want to develop a clean and clear process early on to facilitate that for them. And then retention is key. So you've got to build your program, both your people, your listening skills, your paying attention process, but more importantly, the quality curriculum, progress, updates, testing, and so forth, so that you keep people long term. It's one thing if I put 20 people in the front door and lose 20 people out the back door, that makes me a hamster on the wheel. But if I have 300 students and I'm losing 2% a month or 1% a month, so I'm only losing 4 or 5 people a month, and then I do 20 people a month, my growth is exploding. So I've got to get really good at service and retention, relationship and rapport so that I keep students long term. The other thing is on that, by the way, is our industry is full of people who brag about how few black belts they developed or how few high level students they developed. That's an admission of failure, not success. If I was running a high school and I say that, only 5% of our students who start in our high school ever graduate from high school, that'd be closed down. The state would close it, the feds would close it, all the people would be fired or replaced. That would be a horrible admission of failure. But in a martial arts school, they say they wear it like a badge of courage, like they're developing like super badass people. No, that's just an admission of failure. What we've got to do is get really good at developing super high quality students, not by running off the ones that aren't physically talented, by keeping everybody long enough to get to be very highly talented. But anyway, I'll leave you with this. If you think it's difficult to make a living running a martial arts school, let me show you the ones that are doing an extremely good job of that, including myself, Master Smith, our Master Moody, our entire team. But let me show you the ones that are doing very well, and take their word for it. Take the people who are actually in the arena, who are having success, who have had success for many years. One of the advantages of our team, I was just talking to Master Moody about this, is we have 3 people who ran multiple schools, a chain of schools for many years very successfully. And that's a different skill set than running a successful school. When I run a successful school, oftentimes its personality base is built around me. If I have 5, 6, 10 schools that are all running successfully or more, it's because I've learned how to replicate and duplicate training, support systems, monitoring systems, operation statistics. I know what's going on in each of the schools. I know how to eliminate things that shouldn't be done, and I know how to automate things that can be systematized. So that's another benefit. But if you want to be really successful, learn how to get lead flow, learn how to charge what you're worth, learn how to be worth a high value, and learn how to retain students long term. All pieces that I can teach you that we can walk you through. But again, don't be one of the broke guys. Don't be the ones who are convinced that it's impossible to make a living. Don't be one of those people who think you have to water down curriculum, water down what you're doing in order to have a lot of students. That's not true at all. In fact, it's the opposite. You've got to get better at teaching a higher quality curriculum. Don't be one of those guys that think that everybody nowadays, parents are this, that, and the other thing. Nowadays, kids are this, that, and the other things. Nowadays, parents in reality are desperate for a developmental opportunity to really teach their child how to be self-reliant, how to overcome peer pressure, how to be really competent and capable in academics and everything else they do. It's There's been no better time in history to run a martial arts school, much less it be difficult. So let me leave with that. But I'd love to talk to you and show you some ways to develop a school. But just don't be one of those broke guys with that mindset. It's just self-defeating, and it's going to keep you from accomplishing what you want to accomplish.